Okay, well, we're gonna wait a couple more minutes. We do have 70 plus people registered, 75 people plus 6 watch parties registered across the country today.
Wow, that's
So
great.
we're gonna have over 100 people listening in. Very exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. We have a small group of panelists that we're going to talk to today. We wanted to make sure that we know that we did something similar on March 8th for International Women's Day. This is a more finite topic, and we wanted to make sure that we could really dig in and get to some of the real life obstacles that individuals face and some resources that people don't really know that somebody in that situation need when we are planning on moving from a toxic relationship to independence. I just want to give it a couple more minutes while we wait. We have people coming in from all over the country today. Really excited about that. And this has been a great opportunity for us to start more dialogues for the Women's Opportunity Center and for the Zonta Club of Syracuse. And we're in the middle of 16 days of activism. And it's really an important time for us to continue to spread awareness about abuse. Mm-hmm. At this time of year is the highest impacted time statistically for abuse. Because of the stress surrounding the holidays. Mm-hmm. It increases the risk of the individuals in their homes. So let's start with just a little, how's everybody's day going?
Good.
It's December 1st. Is everybody excited for the month of reflection?
That's right. That's right.
It's exciting.
Decorating.
I sat on Netflix last night and picked all the movies I needed to watch this month. What is anybody else's must-have holiday movies? Like mine is Die Hard.
Okay.
Fred like Claus. And I like It's a Wonderful Life because my family leaves me alone.
Yeah, definitely.
As soon as I turn that on, they all disappear. If anybody has little children, make it a holiday standard at 8:00 on Christmas Eve. We're going to sit here and watch this movie. If you don't want to, you're going to have to go to bed. I'm telling you,
go to bed.
Okay.
We always like to watch A Christmas Story. And then my daughter I bought the matching little bunny outfits, and then we surprised everybody when we walked out Christmas morning wearing them.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, it's a fun time of year for some, right? Yeah, for some. Usually not the women of the family though.
No.
Right?
Because doing all the work, right?
Exactly. Like the elves that show up with those packages. Where did those come from, Mom? Or
the stupid elf that I have had to move or race to move at 4 a.m. repeatedly. I'm already done with him.
Yeah. See, you know what happened is I think it might have been my children's age group was the last group that had a mean elf. Like I grew up with Needle Nose the elf. He was Santa's spy, and he had a bad attitude, and he was waiting for all kids to do something naughty, and he was always spying in the windows. My parents might have been evil geniuses, but
maybe.
So I missed out on the elf on the shelf stuff. Thank goodness, because that just is so much work.
It is a lot of work.
Okay, so we're gonna start moving things along here. I wanted to take a moment and I'm going to introduce our 3 panelists today. We have Elena Agrasto is from Daniela's Steakhouse. She's the boss of all restaurants in the world,
All right.
in my mind. And we have Amy Barone, who is the genius of English literature of the Syracuse University campus. And we have Gail, say your last name.
Rizzo Spilka.
Rizzo Spelka,
You got it.
who is the queen of money at AmeriQ. And we are very blessed to be with such royalty today with all three of these queens. I want to thank each of you for being willing to share your knowledge and your experience and wisdom with each of us. Amy, would you like to kick off and tell us a little bit about you?
Yes. By the way, thank you for having me be part of this panel, and in the past be part of the panel and the organization. The work you do, Women's Opportunity Center and Zonta International is really on the ground work. So I appreciate all of your work, Amy, and all of the work that we do every day. As Amy had mentioned, I am a faculty member at Syracuse University. I've been here for about 20 years. And a lot of the teaching that I implement within the classroom has to do with social justice. So, not separate from my or many others, especially on this panel, our experiences that provides kind of a foundation for a lot of the work that we do. The activism element of it and the advocacy element of it for me is the everyday in the classroom work with students. So I am a survivor of domestic violence as well as sexual abuse. My role at the university is, teaching undergraduate students about writing and rhetoric and understanding context and genre, but our experiences can be, in some instances, woven into a lot of the work that we do. And so, at least for me, my students are engaging with current controversies, a lot of Me Too elements. It's on Us, if you're familiar with that, on the Syracuse University campus and other colleges across the country, about our responsibility for sexual assault, the idea of consent. So what we do in the classroom is bring awareness to some of the elements, even if our experiences don't relate to them. It's the opportunity to be able to present them, to identify them, analyze them, and then engage with them. So there's always this element of, how do we take a current situation, a current injustice, and how do we translate that into some type of awareness or advocacy? So a lot of what I do is to try to integrate that within the classroom with students. And students are coming from a variety of backgrounds, socioeconomically issues or other minority elements that they've been dealing with, homophobia, and then certainly anti-Semitism, especially recently. So what I like to do is to bring awareness to this by recognizing our experiences, of course, but then where there's a limitation of our experiences, how do we start integrating the next step, right? So where does the advocacy come in? So a lot of social awareness within the classroom. And then, as I had mentioned, what do we do with these particular injustices? How do we transform that to wider audiences? So not just the classroom, but how else do we connect that to the community or other elements kind of nationally? I don't know if you're muted, Amy.
I think, Amy, you're muted.
And we're going to do that repeatedly today. Okay. It's a little game we play. It's a good thing it's not a drinking game here, because everybody would be a mess. I always have myself on mute. Elena, would you like to jump in?
Sure. My name's Elena Grasto. I am the Director of Operations and Marketing for the Daniela's brand as a whole. I also am a volunteer at the Women's Opportunity Center, and a domestic abuse survivor myself. So as much awareness and advocacy I can present to people, I strive to do that daily, and just kind of teach people about white collar domestic abuse and what that actually entails.
Thank you very much, Elena. I appreciate that. And Gail, let's talk about you, girl, because you just are fun too, because you got all the money.
Well, and I appreciate you naming me the queen today, so thank you very much. Gail Rizzo-Spilka, I am the AVP of what we call membership development at Americu Credit Union. And kind of a big focus on what we do here is really try to engage and work within the community with not-for-profits, various businesses, but just trying to bring that education out there to all walks, whether you're underserved, middle class, law firm, wherever it may be. We're out there just trying to provide some financial education, literacy, working with people who may have lower credit scores and helping to rebuild credit and give people other options just to get them out of the situation that they're in. So sort of that community advocacy, I'm lucky, is a big part of my job and what I do here and what my team does. I've been in the credit union industry for about 15 years, and obviously just recently became acquainted with the Women's Opportunity Center, and thrilled to be working and partnering and going to be able to do some financial assistance for those that you're working with and serving as well. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much. So as I was coming to work today, I was listening to, trying to get myself in the right headspace. So I was listening to some statistics and trying to really get some information. And there was something that bothered me. Now, I have to tell you, I have a 6-minute drive from my house to Dunkin' Donuts to my office. Okay. So it's not a lot of time, but I was disturbed greatly so that I came into the office and I did math today. And before 7 o'clock in the morning, I was doing math. And one of the statistics that stuck me the hardest was that 36.5% of the female population report experiencing physical or sexual assault. So I always need to put that into something that I can picture. And so Onondaga County, here in central New York, for any of those of you not from this area, our population has 473,236 people. Of that population, 51.4% are female, which leaves the female population in our county is 243,243 female individuals. At 36.5% reporting experiencing physical or sexual assault, that means that 88,783 female citizens in our county have experienced physical or sexual assault. A lot of the questions that people hear without a thorough understanding are, so why didn't she leave if it was that bad? That's the big one. And I don't know anybody that's going through that. That's an other people problem. The reality is that that's less than 1 in 3 women experience and report. And I think we need, as we go through today, we need to remember that that's the key factor, is that all of these statistics are based on reported data. Not everybody reports. Most people do not report. So why don't survivors just leave? Survivors face many barriers when they are making up their minds to leave an abusive relationship. Survivors may be afraid that their batterers will kill them if they leave. The violence will increase based on their past experiences. Their partners are not able to survive alone or may commit suicide. The batterers will take the children or harm another family member. As a matter of fact, 20% of domestic violence related homicides are for the family and friends, the bystanders of the victim. The abuser may harm the pets or they will lose their children. In most cases, the fear is well-founded. So survivors are at an increased risk when they are leaving an abusive relationship. Those who have tried to leave may know that they are at an increased risk of severe violence if they try again. This separation violence may include stalking, harassment or threats, kidnapping the children or holding her hostage, teaching them a lesson for trying to leave, or homicide. We're here today to talk about the obstacles that individuals living in abuse face when trying to leave. Each of you has had a different experience and a different perspective. The reality is that it is not easy to get out of any relationship. And in a relationship that includes abuse, it has the additional obstacles associated with it. The most frequent question that we hear is, if it was so bad, why didn't she leave? I'm going to start with Gail. How do you feel when you hear that question?
It's very upsetting when I hear that question, to be honest. And because I say there's so many different forms and types of abuse, and it may not always be that physical abuse. So just from my own experience, it was that emotional abuse, that kind of breaking down of your self-confidence and pulling me away from friends and putting a wedge between the family, so that it was really my go-to person. So you think, you're trying to leave, but you're so invested in this person. What will I do without them? And also feeling like you're really not worthy enough as a person to leave. So to me, I find it's very upsetting because there's so many reasons why a woman would not walk away from that situation. So I think instead of victim shaming here, we all need to get out and just understand that everybody has their own reasons for not leaving and for the difficulty in doing that.
Thank you, Gail.
You're welcome.
Amy, how does that make you feel when you hear that statement?
Obviously it's upsetting, and it really just speaks to a lot of the tropes that circulate. We hear blame the victim with rape. We hear blame the victim with, as you mentioned, other types of assaults, and then certainly abuse and violence. So I feel as though there are such moments of intersectionality where we're talking about there is no one entity that is blamed. And those of us that are survivors and those of us that are advocates for victims of abuse and assault and violence, we are really trying to change the culture. Really, it comes down to also changing the culture. How do we start integrating, even at a younger age, for my girls, even when they were younger, dress codes in schools, right? Which seems a little bit archaic, but you can't show a spaghetti strap, right? Because you're giving the wrong impression to the boy in the class. I've had conversations with principals about this. We're sexualizing our young adults. They are integrated culturally at a very young age to feel as though they are making choices that in the end result in some type of assault or abuse or victimization. So it is just a perpetuation. When I hear, why don't you just leave? It's just a perpetuation of some of the beliefs, the myths that go along with a lot of the tropes of violence and assault. And so there's many moments that we can think about ways to dismantle that. But there's a lot of work to be done since we are still being presented with these issues of victim blaming.
Elena. One of the things I love about Elena is that she's a little fire pistol. So sometimes I never know how she'll react to certain questions. How does that phrase sit with you?
So this one's a tough one because I personally had it said to me. So it, in a way, it makes me feel sad because it brings me back to a few times where people have asked, why didn't you just leave? You know, there's so many different factors that go into why she doesn't leave. You know, and sometimes abuse to some people seems like it's not abuse until you're actually left the relationship to find that, wow, like I was in this manipulative, gaslit atmosphere and I didn't know any better. So to say why, you know, why doesn't she just leave is, for me, it's personal. So, you know, I always try to take that actual phrase with a grain of salt, because when people have said that to me, you know, I could give you a million reasons now, but in the thick of it, I can't give you an answer, you know?
So I am a survivor of sexual assault by a family member. When I was 12, I was raped by my uncle. I couldn't leave. I didn't have choices. I didn't have rights. It was 1982 and you were better seen and not heard. And that was the dynamic. There were no options for me. And when I shut down emotionally or closed myself off or pulled away from people for the next several decades, it was still happening, even though it had happened long ago. How do you leave that behind is a question that always sticks with me. And for me, one of the most infuriating questions I can hear is, so why doesn't she just leave? Because I can't tell anybody else what to do with their life. And where are they going to go? If we stop and think about the fact that right here in Onondaga County, there is one primary domestic violence agency support system in our county. And as we just discussed, that's 88,000 individuals that are female. That doesn't even include the male abuse victims. 88,000 female victims of physical and sexual assault. But that doesn't take into account your mental abuse, your emotional abuse, your financial abuse, religious abuse, all of those things. There's not an avenue or a support system in our community for those types of abuse. So it is the obstacles that are there for the emotional support to leave, as well as the practical supports that are needed. Statistics show that nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. And again, I went back and did math today. I was all kinds of math girl this morning. And during this call, we opened this call up at 11:15. It goes until 1. So that is 1 hour and 45 minutes. That's 2,100 people that are being battered or sexually assaulted during this time frame in the United States. 1 in 3 women, and it's actually less than 1 in 3 women, experience physical assault and abuse in their lifetime. 98% of abusive relationships include financial abuse. So if you're looking at why isn't she leaving, and 98% of them are experiencing financial abuse, there's one answer right there. 79% of reported abuse occurs in poverty level populations. Let's touch on that one real quick. These statistics are based on reported instances of abuse, and these statistics are generally gathered by agencies that primarily serve poverty level populations. So people that are not living in poverty, there's not really a statistic base for them. The average misnomer is maybe 11% report that are not living in poverty. When you talk about why does she stay, and you talk about financial abuse, and you take into the concept of white collar abuse being anybody that doesn't meet poverty guidelines. Poverty guidelines in our area, a family of two, I think the limit is $19,000 a year for a family of two. If you make more money than that, or your household makes more money than that, then you're not eligible for support services. How accurate do you think these statistics are? And what do you think accounts for the disparity between the below poverty and above poverty domestic abuse reports? And let's start with Gail this time.
And one of the statistics I found was it was 99% of are financially abused. So it's shocking to me. And I think it's that level of control and manipulation of somebody. You know, you're breaking them down emotionally. Now you have control over their finances. You can't work. I think the statistics are obviously way off and underreported, and especially in that middle class level. They're basing things on household income. However, the abused doesn't have access to that income. The abused maybe doesn't work. So the income they're basing that off of isn't even hers, or isn't even money she has access to. I also think perhaps in that middle class level, there's additional shame that happens there. They don't want their friends and family or their neighbors to know, right? The people around them, they want to keep it hush hush. So they're not reporting it perhaps as often as somebody who might be in that underserved area. Maybe they don't want to get that police record filed so that there's, any kind of issues with future jobs, their career paths and things like that. So I think the statistics are definitely underreported.
Amy, what do you think of when you hear these statistics?
Just to piggyback off of what Gail had said, I feel like we have realized that regardless of our socioeconomic status, that reporting is not representative of those who are victims. So I feel as though across the board, when we hear from survivors or victims about potentially why, a lot of that, of course, has to do with financial access and also access to information. Those that are socioeconomically disadvantaged don't necessarily have access to information about what are the options for individuals. And for me, although I had a profession, I was working part-time to support 3 younger children. And so I had tried to seek out and of course did not qualify. And so I had found, wow, I want to be able to have support, but financially wasn't able to access the legal aid. And so I was kind of in between. I couldn't necessarily afford to have strong legal counsel to support me. And I also didn't qualify because of the income to be able to have free legal aid. There were organizations that I sought out. Women and children at the local YWCA in the county in which I resided was helpful for me. But going back to your original question, statistically, we know, regardless of our economic standing, that the reporting is not actively reflected of the victimization, which is why a lot of the grassroots work that WOC and Zonta International and some of the other nonprofits seek to change is to provide that type of support for victims and, of course, for survivors.
Thank you, Amy. Elena, what goes through your mind about these numbers?
So I definitely agree with everybody when I say they're skewed. This 100% they're skewed. You know, and the amount of women that I know personally that come from a middle class to upper class family that have been abused, it's astounding. You know, the numbers that are put out, they don't tell you. And when I was in the situation, much like Amy, I was caught in this in between where I had made too much. And then when I did reach out, I was met with, you know, well, it's going to cost you $6,000 for this. It's going to cost you $5,000 for this. So then you're trying to pull yourself back together. And then here you have all these people telling you like, okay, well, you know, your credit score is awful right now because you are so dependent on this person. And so the only thing you qualify for is a $2,000 loan when your lawyer's $5,000, you know, so there's so many things that encompass the result of financial abuse that, you know, at a poverty level, if I was in that situation, I might have had a break, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of information out there for middle, I say middle, you know, anything above 25,000 is considered middle class now, which makes no sense to me. But, you know, at that level, there's not a lot of information out there for women or men on how to obtain some sort of financial freedom from this person. And some way to pull yourself together, because if you, yeah, we'll attest to this. If you go to a bank, fresh out of a divorce, it's tough. It's tough to get anywhere. So.
Yeah, it's very true. And, unfortunately, if there's no income, a financial institution can't lend because there does have to be some income coming in. And then you're looking at, of course, yes, a credit report that's probably been destroyed. So it's kind of getting somebody out, getting started somewhere with the very basics, which we can talk about at a later question, but you know, the financial part is devastating. It's devastating. You know, oftentimes maybe something was all of the loans were put in your name. And of course, then they don't get paid and everything falls back on you. So it's a tough situation to be in. It is. Amy, Cynthia had a note. She wanted to share something.
Yes.
Housing for Section 8.
Hi, yes, I work for a housing authority, Ithaca Housing Authority, so just south of Onondaga County by a little bit. I work in a program called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, so it's underneath the umbrella of Section 8. So I don't do that work, but I do know, and I do serve women who have a Section 8 voucher, which means rental assistance that's provided by the federal government, by HUD. And you go to a landlord and you present them with this voucher, and the housing authority pays some of the rent. The person who holds the voucher, if they're experiencing domestic violence, they, under the VAWA Act, they can move with their Section 8 voucher out of county or out of the region that's administered by that housing authority. And they can, and that can happen, I believe, fairly quickly. But that being said, I don't do Section 8 work, but I do have a number of people on my caseload who did have a emergency housing voucher that they did flee from their abusers. That is a means, and yes, that's an income-based, income eligibility-based program. So it may not pertain for the middle-class man or woman that's being abused, but for those people who are in poverty, it's just good to know that is available. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll go back to mute.
It's important that we share resources as we come across them. So I appreciate you sharing that, Cynthia. I really do. We have been running a few case studies at the Women's Opportunity Center over the past several months. We have some clients that are in the process of leaving abusive relationships, and they run into obstacles around housing being turned down by landlords because they're leaving an abusive relationship, causing it to be an unsafe environment for the other tenants of the property. We're also hearing that as soon as the landlord has heard that there's a domestic violence past, they just reject the applications for some apartments. Other obstacles that an individual faces are, if you are working and you are supporting yourself and your income is above the assistance level, you still have to deal with the legalities and the requirements of leaving the relationship. Sometimes you have to deal with court cases as far as the violence itself. There's meetings, sometimes there's meetings with Child Protective Services that you have to be available to if there were children that witnessed this. Sometimes there's instances where you have to go to court for custody or restraining orders or any of those items. And a lot of time is taken for the victim that has to leave the workplace to go and address those issues. That's another obstacle for women as they're leaving these relationships, as they try to keep those jobs or try to rebuild their credit or try to reestablish themselves financially. Additionally, you have places that if there's custody issues, they don't want to take your child for childcare because they don't want to get into any safety issues there with the other children. On top of all of those factors, the statistics that we've covered is that really it's you would be very hard pressed to find an individual who has not experienced or knows somebody who has experienced abuse in their life. What do you believe are the common obstacles that prevent an individual from leaving an abusive relationship, either from observation or experience? Elena.
So I can say from experience, one of them is definitely embarrassment. I can say that I've seen that in many cases where, you're embarrassed to leave. You're embarrassed that you got yourself in that situation, that you didn't see what that person was. So that's definitely one of the emotions that I think that goes into having an obstacle, because then, you have to really kind of sit down and think with yourself, okay, can I get past this? And how do I move forward with my life? So, personally, once I got past that embarrassment, my next obstacle was financially, because financially I had to decide what I could live off of if I was leaving the relationship. So, for me, I had to really kind of sit down and get my thoughts together and say, okay, well, I know that in a year I can save X, Y, Z, and I can definitely make an exit. That year came and I still hadn't exited. I had the money, but then it took the final abuse, that it was kind of like the last straw, where then I could confidently say, okay, I'm leaving. But I think mostly it is financial abuse. I think anybody that's in a relationship, unless you are making enough on your own, maybe no kids, you own the house, then that's one thing. But with every abuse situation that I have seen, finances is the biggest, because, either you have a house or you don't,
Well, and how do you feed your kids?
Yep.
Where do you get the money to even put food in their mouth as you walk out the door? You have to find a way to keep a roof over their head and keep them safe. And a lot of individuals are being threatened with, if you leave and you go and try to go into a shelter, then I'm going to report you for being an unfit parent. So there's a lot of manipulation from
Absolutely.
the abuser.
And the thought of losing your kids, that definitely, was in my mind, after the amount of manipulation, to feel like, I was as bad as the person as I was, then it was okay, am I going to lose my kids now because I'm leaving, because I don't have money, well, luckily for me, I did, but at one point that was a thought. So.
Gail, as you have left and had to reestablish yourself and discovered starting over, what were some of the most common obstacles that you have either seen from people coming into your establishment or experienced yourself?
I'm gonna say I'm gonna really have to piggyback off of what Elena said. I think, of course, depending on the situation, there could be a lot of just fear, of somebody harming you if you leave. But I do think that the financial obstacles really come into play for people. I mean, we said there's no money if you haven't tucked any away. And again, like you said, how am I putting a roof over my head? Or if you have children, how do you take care of them? So it's all of those things. I don't have credit. I can't even go out and get a loan to maybe get a car if you need a car for transportation to get a job. So I think a lot of that comes back to those finances and having the financial ability to take care of yourself. And so that's why I think that the prepping portion, I think, like you said, Elena, you knew a year and you were like, okay, I've got to get ready for this and start tucking away whatever you could to get out and have your exit strategy. So unfortunately, I think it's sad, but it's finances for a lot of people.
Thank you.
You're
Amy,
welcome.
how about you?
I feel as though it's even difficult to understand when you're in that violent situation, that because you're also in many instances isolated. And for me, I have a background in this. So I have a background in gender studies. I know about assault. I know about violence. it becomes this isolation element where you experience abuse, but you're second guessing whether it is abuse. And so the awareness about what is acceptable or unacceptable, proper or healthy or unhealthy behaviors is in some instances a foundation, right? How can we recognize that this is an inappropriate way to be treated, right? The gaslighting, the manipulation, certainly the financial abuse, the physical abuse, the controlling elements of it, all of those are big pieces that make it a lot more complicated to even sort out. Where do you go? Is this even wrong? And so for me, I had taken note about many instances that had happened just because I tend to write things down. But when the moment came where I had to, something was so bad, as Elena had talked about in her example, where it was the last straw, so to speak, I wasn't even able to rationalize, even as somebody who has access to this information, maybe access to some support through a nonprofit. For me, it was even difficult to understand, what do I do? Where do I go? And how does this work? And so when we think about what are those obstacles, there's so many of them. Of course, there's financial. What are our options? There's not that many, especially if you don't qualify for support or if you need to seek out your own legal aid, which is costly. But it comes down to, do we understand this is abuse in the first place? It's not the physical abuse that's so evident. It's all of that other elemental stuff, the emotional, the manipulation, all of those other pieces. Once you're in that context, it's difficult to see and feel that this is not correct. So again, we go back to the idea of understanding abuse culturally. What does abuse mean culturally? How can we start to understand that even with individuals at a young age to adulthood, to even elderly? It's this idea that there is acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. And once we are isolated in those moments, it's so difficult to understand that. So no, I don't necessarily have a solution as to how to make sure that those elements are there for a lot of victims. There's so many moving pieces to it. I remember when it was brought to my attention, I could not think rationally, even as somebody who had access to information or has educational background in this particular instance. I wasn't able to think rationally because I was in survival mode. My brain could not function. And so I had to rely on certain individuals or organizations that I knew would be the ones that would be able to make the right decisions for me. I had to trust those individuals to walk me through what I needed to do. When I had to file for an order of protection, I was shaking. It was traumatic, really traumatic, like cellular level traumatic. I had to write down word by word, date by date, every instance that took place before I walked into the courtroom. And I remember I had access to a friend of a friend who worked in legal aid in another state. And she said to me on the phone, "This is serious." And I thought, oh, if she says this is serious and she's a lawyer, okay, this might be serious. And so she explained what you needed to do. I listened to her. Why did I listen to her? Because I had to put my trust in somebody else who was an expert. I couldn't think.
And that is a big thing right there, is that you are so conditioned to doubt yourself.
Yes.
And it happens gradually. It's not like somebody walks into a relationship and says, "Hi, my name is Amy, and I'm here to sign up for the abuse relationship. Is that you? Are you here? My self-esteem is in this box over here. You can access it as you like." That's not how that works. First, there's cycles, and there's patterns, and there's behaviors. And people often say, naively, that well, I'm too smart to get caught in that. Like there's an IQ test for an abusive relationship. When in reality, you're in it before you know you're in it. There's another obstacle that we that I want to bring up is that, and that's the fact that what if nobody believes me? He's an upstanding member of our family. He's a great guy. He's part of he's a public servant, or he's a highly respected individual in the community, or everybody just loves him and they wouldn't possibly believe me. Has anybody ever experienced that personality?
Wholeheartedly. My abuser was the best of the best. He was the best at painting a picture of how great he was. Everybody loved him. There's no way that he could have done that. He's not that type of person. Abuse can come from anybody. They don't have to look a certain way, act a certain way. My abuser had everybody fooled until people started to see who he was. They started to see the patterns, which was, for me, it was kind of healing, because then it was, okay, well, I'm not crazy, but for a real long time, I was the problem. It was all in my head.
I think a lot of people living in that situation don't believe that it's happening to them. It's got to be. I just don't. It can't really be happening to me right now. This can't be happening. Or it was just, he said it would never happen again. Or you want to believe them. You don't want to be wrong about this. Or there's the other mindset, the charming, broken, poor person that has survived so much damage that you can justify why he loses his temper, or why he doesn't know better, or if I can just help him heal, this will stop. Unfortunately, that is a very common statement that we hear from survivors is, he just really had a troubled upbringing. And it feeds on the nurturing side of someone's nature. If you really were a good person, you would help them heal. How often do you think that kind of manipulation occurs in these instances? I'm going to ask Amy, since this is your professional arena.
I was just going to piggyback off of what you were saying, Amy, before I answer your question, was that I feel as though females, especially, and then if we get into minority females, it gets even more compounded. But we are immersed in a culture where we really don't trust our own instincts. And especially for myself, and many other females, it's difficult to even vocalize what you are thinking or feeling or experiencing. And so a lot of this comes back to the idea of, do we even feel as though we have worthiness to speak up? And what I'm feeling and witnessing and experiencing really bad? I think that those elements that kind of meld together make it even more difficult to try and get out or to make a decision about leaving. So your question, Amy, was asking, you had asked about whether or not, I'm sorry, I forgot what you had asked.
If you noticed any kind of patterns or red flags that might be associated with the preying on the maternal or nurturing nature of a woman to heal her abuser.
Oh, of course. Yes. I mean, right. Again, we talk about the culture, right? Females, we are culturally the nurturers. And also piggybacking off of what I had mentioned about instinctually, like we don't trust our instincts. And so if much of our attention, if we are mothers, but even if we are not, there is this expectation that we must be nurturing and taking care of. And at least for my situation, since my abuser was also an alcoholic, the codependent element certainly added another layer to the situation. At one point, I thought it was my job to stop this man from drinking. It was my job to fix his addiction. It was my job to rein in his erratic and violent behaviors. I had to find him the right medical professionals, drive him there, take the children, take on more jobs to be able to try to problem solve in this microcosm. So it becomes this really, it's complicated, of course, right? There's never just one layer to a lot of these experiences. And certainly there is that element of expectation. Like, am I a bad person if I don't take care of this man or individual or whomever the abuser is? And so again, we think back about what are the expectations of the work that we do, regardless, if we are females, but more importantly, we are kind of expected to take on that nurturing role. So that creates another obstacle for us.
Thank you very much. On average, a victim will try to leave an abusive relationship 7 times before they are successful. The most dangerous time for a victim is when they are trying to leave. For others, it may be when they leave and are trying to start a new life while extricating themselves from their abuser. If you were going to help create an exit strategy toolkit, what are some of the items that you believe must be included in that toolkit for the victim to have the best chance at a safe and sustainable exit? Let's start with Gail, because money is going to be a big one.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'll take this one just from the financial perspective. I think the first thing anybody who's thinking about leaving needs to do is get that separate hidden bank account established. So start stashing away whatever you can. And I would say when you do that, make sure you can set the accounts up so that there's no mailings. I think that's a big part too. We don't want all of a sudden your bank statements coming to the house, or perhaps even if you can get a PO box set up, that's even better. But making sure that when you go in, making sure you're telling them no mailings. But during that account opening process, I think it's really important. That's kind of your opportunity to sit down with somebody who's typically, a financial expert to say, okay, can you pull up my credit and let's see what's on there? Because sometimes the victim may not even know that their abuser's been opening accounts in their names and things like that. So I think it's really important to look through that credit report. Now, anybody can always, do that on their own as well. There's free sites to go to. There's one that's called the official site, which is annualcreditreport.com. And with that, what I always say is I like to tell people you can pull it from all 3 bureaus. in a way to monitor it during the year. So as you're preparing to leave, you can ensure that nothing else is happening. You can pull it at the beginning of the year from experience, wait 4 months, pull it from TransUnion, wait a couple more months and pull it from Equifax. But then you're monitoring that throughout the year. And that's sort of where you can officially go dispute anything. But I would say when you're going and getting that account open, look to your credit unions or a community bank, because typically we're not for profits. And so if you don't have a lot of money to open the account, there's really no account opening fees. They're not looking at what your credit score is to get the account opened. And then usually the underwriting guidelines are much, much easier. So as you're trying to work to rebuild your credit unions, typically are a better option. And then secondly would be like your community banks. So I think that's just important, is if you're out there advising people on where to go, I think that's a best bet. Also, as you can put a freeze on that credit report, right? So if you're sitting there and you're noticing things are happening, let's put a freeze on that credit report so that the abuser can't continue to open accounts in your name. And what I have seen here is we have had people come in and say, okay, this loan was taken out. I did not sign for this loan. I did not agree to this loan. And we have different tools here that we can pull. So we can pull, if it was done in a branch, we can pull security footage from that day and time to see who came in and opened that account. Virtually, which does happen a lot now, we can go in, we can pull IP addresses. What computer was this opened on? Because sometimes people will say, well, I was at work at that time, that was done at my home computer. Or where were the proceeds of the loan? Where did they go? Did they come right into a joint account and then transferred right to the husband's account? So there's different things that we can do to try to back up that story too. And all financial institutions will do that. So just so you know, there are some stops that people can try to do to get any of themselves off of any of those loans that might be going negative. So just some tools there, but that credit freeze really is a big help too. Ensuring you don't lose your PIN, because you're going to want to have that, because you're going to need to go get your landlord's going to need to look at your credit report and things like that. So I say use your financial institution as that trusted resource to help you build the credit. Unfortunately, like I mentioned before, we can't give loans if there's no income. And it makes me sad, because, we certainly wish we could. So getting that job established, if you already work, again, tucking as much of that away as you can. And then as soon as you have some income coming in, then starting to do little steps to rebuild that credit. Small credit cards, things that are just in your name that you can control. So those would be my financial suggestions for anybody.
And there's a lot of online courses that are free that people can take for learning how to manage their money, for people that don't know how to do that. Other resources, for example, there's displaced homemaker programs are a nationwide program, and they help women that are leaving relationships, starting over. And very often they will provide financial education on services, and they'll partner with financial institutions to come in and help individuals learn how to manage those resources. So learning what resources you have available is very, very important. Elena, what would you put in the toolbox?
So aside from the financial, I would say legal resources, because that's huge. Whether it's a divorce or whether it is a restraining order, all of those things come into play. And if you look at I'm just going to use this as an example. So I belong to a mom's group on Facebook, and there has been many times where I have seen an anonymous post come up that says, I can't find a lawyer that will help me with my case because of my financial situation. So I think in that toolkit, we have to kind of share lawyers that are willing to help for little or no money. You know, as it's not a resource that's widely available. So, you know, that was a huge one for me in general too. I needed legal advice, and I couldn't find it, or it was too much money. So, you know, that's a huge part of any exit strategy, because even if it's, you know, just a relationship with a boyfriend, at some point you're going to need legal advice. When it comes from an abusive relationship, 99% of the time you aren't just walking away. That abuse continues until you are officially out of that relationship, you know, and you have set up your life, because they come back. Abusers will come back because you are their victim.
I think it's also worthwhile noting that there's a lot of legal steps that you can take where, you know, well, you can fill out the paperwork yourself and bring it to the court. But one of the major obstacles that an individual faces is that not all of us speak legal. It's a language all of its own. And we had an individual who recently had to go and file custody paperwork. Couldn't find any legal support, couldn't find legal translations, or, you know, just to speak the language of legal. It took 10 trips to the courthouse before the paperwork would be accepted by the clerk. That's 10 days of work lost. That's a financial impact there. Additionally, it was, you're trying to help somebody who's in the middle of leaving an abusive relationship, physical, mental, financial, fear, everything that you could possibly deal with. And again, like Amy said, you can't focus, you can't concentrate, you can't think, and you're trying to translate these documents because you can't get help anywhere. So that's a big one. Legal support is huge, and it's sorely lacking for individuals that just are looking for somebody to spend an hour talking to you and explaining to you what to expect. You know, how many copies of What to Expect When You're Expecting are sold, but we don't have a book that says what to expect when you're leaving.
Truthfully too, there's a trauma that comes with that.
Yeah.
It is, it really is, when you think legally of this, you know, when you think of legal decisions that you have to make about your life, there is almost a trauma. You know, I really do have PTSD from a lot of the stuff that I was put through, the anxiety of going to court, the anxiety of getting a lawyer, the anxiety of getting police involved. You know, those are lasting effects. So when you're out there doing it on your own, it's rough. It's real rough.
Amy, what would you put in the toolbox?
Well, I feel like Gail and Elena really hit two of the really strong ones, which is the financial aspect, and then certainly the legal one. And I have a couple other suggestions, but just to piggyback off of what Elena had said, I put in the chat that there is an online free legal platform called avo.com, that I had discovered through a friend who had already gone through a divorce because I was in the same situation. What you can do with that site is post a question to an attorney that practices in your state. And so I would, in the past, frequently post questions like, if I need to change a custody order, or if there is a violation order, how do I go about doing that? Most of the time, the attorneys will post answers, of course, for free. It's just a service that they do. They get ratings, and then eventually down the line, they hope other individuals might see their connection and wanting to help, and they want to retain them as an attorney. But they do this for free. There are other legal resources that I had to get because I myself, at many instances, could not continually afford. I had so many thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of legal fees. At one point, I had to represent myself, which to Elena's point is traumatizing. There is a trauma involved with surviving not only the escape from the abuse, but how do you then continue to try to protect yourself? And if you have children, your children as well. And so you're constantly in survival mode, which does impact our brains also. But so I remember the Onondaga County Courthouse has free legal volunteers from Vera House. They are at the courthouse, or at least they used to be at the courthouse. I think it was like maybe once or twice a week. I remember having to get legal help from them as well in the past. There's also attorneys that provide a free 1-hour consultation that a lot of the victims might be able to go in. You have a list of questions, you use your hour wisely. That may or may not result in wanting to have to put down thousands of dollars for a retainer per se. But at least you can secure that type of legal advice, since we, at least myself, I am not an expert. In addition to the financial and the legal element, which are biggies, like those are the biggies, but then you have to think about, because you are going through this, you cannot do this by yourself. Okay. So for me, it was important to have support. Now, for some people, support might mean having a close friend or family, right? I really didn't have that foundational support for myself, but I did have a therapist who was able to guide me through a lot of this. Look, if this is what needs to happen, this is what's going to come next, you're probably experiencing this. Because if we don't have the support trying to move through these next phases, it makes it awfully difficult for us to actually move through those spaces. So I would say, if you have access to some type of outside support, whether it's a therapist, whether it's telling your family, whether it's having close friends, that would be useful too. And the last thing I would probably suggest is that if you do have children, for me, it was important to provide support for them as well. So whether or not they saw benefits of having, let's say, a therapist, even if it's a school counselor, like that would be another recommendation that I would make, to try to provide support for the kids that doesn't necessarily result in anything out of pocket. Notifying the schools, the school counselors, letting them know what's transpiring, to try to have as much support for the children through this as you do yourself, just makes it a little bit more manageable for you.
I also have heard a lot lately that it would be valuable to have peer support groups, where you could go and just talk through and realize I'm not alone. A lot of what we hear from clients is that after they leave the abuse and they work through the leaving stages and the processes and the systems and the requirements and the hoops, they feel that the abuse is continuing. And it's not directly from the abuser, but because of that abuser, a woman has to go stand in front of somebody 10 times and explain the same story over and over and over again. So she's got to relive it. And then she's got to go apply for help somewhere else, and she's got to relive it over and over and over again. I personally think that it would be beneficial for, to have a group of women that could come together that would comfortably say, you know what, you're not alone. I can go with you. I can be your second set of ears. I'm here to support you how you need, because what every woman needs is going to be different. And I think that a lot of that is what we also need, is to help the next generation of girls coming through the schools change those conversations that they're having internally and with one another. Speaking with my daughter yesterday, randomly, she said, I always wished I had an older sister that I could have gone to with questions. And of course, as your mother, you're like, well, you could have come to me. And then you're like, wait, the mother's you're not going to come to your mom with all these questions if they'd had more peer support when they were younger. Because one of the most disturbing statistics is that many women start entering patterns of abusive relationships at the age of 14 or 15. And it takes decades before they break those cycles for themselves. What resources do you believe are needed to successfully support individuals in domestic abuse, to end victim shaming, and create communities that provide safe living environments for these individuals and helping individuals receive trauma-informed support? And trauma-informed support needs to include helping employers better understand how to help one of their employees leaving domestic violence, understanding the trauma that that person is going through, and that even coming to them and admitting that and expecting the shame. That's an education in the community that we need, that I personally feel needs to be handled better. Gail, what do you think?
I think there's so many additional resources that need to be added, but again, I'll just kind of go back to the finances, the kind of that financial guidance and counseling, because people just don't know what they need to do to start rebuilding or hiding that nest egg and getting out. And if you don't mind me sharing, Amy, I'm just kind of excited because with this new relationship, what AmeriQ and the Women's Opportunity Center are going to be doing. I've got a wonderful teammate named Charlie. She's fantastic and very passionate about this, but she's going to be an absolute resource so that any of the women needing help can call her anytime, email her anytime, set things up virtually. So if you can't get away, whether the woman's at work or anything, will be available basically at any time that they need to speak with her. And whether that's just simply getting that account open, or if it's just answering those financial questions or concerns, she's going to be a point of resource. And also being able to come into the Women's Opportunity Center a couple of times a month to also meet with women that can do that. But I think if we can, so that's obviously just in Central New York, but if we can kind of take those models with other Women's Opportunity Centers in Zonta across the country, finding a trusted partner on that financial side, that's really going to be a point of contact person, I think would be a tremendous help.
We've been very lucky, and I'm glad to see that Nancy Kinsella is on here as well. Nancy is also from a credit union. She's from Syracuse, and Nancy has come in the past and helped our clients open accounts here at the center while they were taking classes.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a great opportunity. These credit unions that we have locally here have such great atmospheres as far as supporting the community. My question would be, how do we clone all of you great women that continue to support these women in creative ways?
Right.
Elena, what do you think that we could do better as a community to support individuals?
So for me, it is one thing that I would say is more therapy that's available for these women. I know I have struggled myself for years with PTSD and the effects of a abusive relationship. Locally, it's tough to find a therapist. It's tough to find somebody that's going to help you work through the effects of abuse. And I can honestly say, this past year was, I think, the toughest for me. It was, kind of me growing and realizing, how much abuse I had gone through not only with my past partner, but with partners when I was younger. So I found a website which, while it's not local, it's called Alma, ALMA, and they pair you with therapists that are in your insurance network, or they find you therapists that are at low or no cost. And when I say that this changed my life, like, you can find a therapist that specializes in trauma, sexual abuse, PTSD, ADHD, autism. There's a checkbox for everything. And having that resource was so valuable to me this year, in one of my darkest years I've ever had in my whole life. And if I can say anything to anybody that is dealing with the effects of abuse, find a good therapist and a good resource for your outlet, because otherwise you're going to drown, not only financially, but mentally.
Amy, how about you?
Well, I feel as though we probably can all agree that there is not just one entity, right, that's going to be able to solve a lot of these issues. We are talking about education, right? How do we educate individuals about what is abuse? How do we educate females about cultural expectations of what we are supposed to do or assumed to do? We also have been talking about legality, right? There's that piece of it. And there's not just one element to getting out or beginning your new life, but how do you have that legal support, right? And we talked about a couple of those resources. I feel like there should be more legal resources for victims and survivors, and at the very least, more access for these individuals to be able, because that is the big piece, right? Much of this results in a court hearing or some type of courtroom, especially if you have children involved, and especially if you have a marriage to this particular individual. The financial element, of course, that Gail had talked about, and then we're also the element of advocacy. So there's all these moving pieces that if we, have the WOC and Zonta International, if we have this this big entity of resources that are available, then it's a little bit more easier for victims to find you and you be able to sort of delegate where you might be able to go for support. So, there's the cultural element too. We think about what are our belief systems and how are these belief systems ingrained institutionally through marriage, through education, through whatever that might be. There's all these moments that need to be dismantled. So each of us kind of have a different area of expertise, but we come together for the idea of trying to provide resources for victims and also advocate for a lot of these changes. So the more we're able to do what we know and provide that for a lot of our survivors, the easier I feel like it's going to be. And the other thing I was going to add is Elena had mentioned that there's, she was talking about a Facebook group or an online group. There are a lot more groups that if you have access to social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, even LinkedIn, you can think about what might be free for you. There's a lot of groups that are set up that might not necessarily be local, but they might also provide that element of support where there can be suggestions and advice given, and at the very least, feeling like you aren't alone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, you ladies are fantastic, and I'm really excited. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're going to continue these conversations over the next year. We're planning quarterly conversations about the topics about abuse and helping to find ways to help individuals extricate themselves sustainably and safely and feeling supported. I did want to say that we have 2 workshops over the next couple weeks here at the Women's Opportunity Center that we're excited as we started them as part of the partnership with the Zonta Club of Syracuse and the 16 days of activism, to help really highlight different resources that women need. On the 5th of December, the Women's Opportunity Center is going to be doing a web-based workshop on understanding what is financial abuse. And then on the following week is going to be a web-based workshop on tech abuse. Technology abuse is becoming something that needs to be really talked about a lot more. I was horrified to even have it because, you know, again, I didn't grow up with a cell phone in my hand, so it's not second nature to me. But when I heard that one survivor said that she woke up to having her thumbprint scanned to open her phone in her sleep, and another individual woke up to having their face being scanned on their phone. The things that we think that we're doing to keep ourselves safe as we create these exit strategies, as we rely on technology more, we need to make sure we're using those safety skills as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call here. I'm going to put our phone number right in the chat in case anybody has any questions. I am really excited to look forward to our next event in March. More information will be coming out about that. And we will be sending out next week answers to any questions that we receive from you. I'm going to put my personal email in here so you can email me any questions or comments or concerns, and we will send all of that information out to everybody on the registration list, as well as the link to this recording. I promised everybody to end at 1 o'clock to respect your schedules, and look at that, I did it 3 minutes early, people. So I am really thankful to all of you this holiday season. But as you go forward, I want you to consider living a life of advocacy instead of apathy, because I think that's the only way we can make sure that our daughters don't have to go through what we did. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.